The unsung brilliance of Belisarius. History remembers Alexander, Caesar, and Napoleon, legendary commanders who built empires through brilliant conquest. Yet in the shadows of their fame stands a general who may have surpassed them all. Belisarius, the one-armed guardian of Roman civilization. With nothing but a skeleton force of 5,000 men and his own tactical genius, he reclaimed an empire piece by piece, winning battles against impossible odds from the scorching deserts of Persia to the marble halls of Rome itself. His reward: not glory, but betrayal. Not a crown, but a beggar's cup. In an age when Rome was supposed to be dead, Belisarius proved that one man's loyalty could resurrect an empire. He faced down Persian Immortals, outmaneuvered Gothic hordes, and crushed Vandal kingdoms, all while navigating the lethal politics of Constantinople. This is the story of a general who could anticipate his enemies' moves as if reading their minds, a commander who treated defeated foes with such humanity that they often joined his cause, and a hero who remained faithful to a suspicious emperor who repaid his victories with humiliation. In Belisarius, we find that rarest of combinations: tactical brilliance matched with unwavering integrity, and unbreakable will tempered by genuine compassion. The rise of Belisarius, a boy from the Balkans. The frontier town of Germania had seen better days. By 500 AD, this outpost in the Balkans stood as a last reminder of Roman authority in a world increasingly foreign to the empire that had built it. Here, where the mountains met the plains, the old world collided with the new. Roman walls and watchtowers cast long shadows over markets where Gothic merchants haggled in their harsh tongue with Greek traders, while Bulgarian raiders prowled the distant hills. In this crucible of civilizations, Belisarius drew his first breath. The boy's earliest memories were of warfare, though not the organized battles of legion against legion that had marked Rome's glory days. Instead, he witnessed the swift, brutal raids that characterized this new age of combat. Bulgarian horsemen would emerge from the morning mist, their arrows already in flight, while the town's defenders scrambled to mount a response. Young Belisarius learned to read the signs others missed: the unusual silence of birds, the subtle movement of shadows at dawn, the distant dust clouds that meant the difference between life and death. By age 10, he could distinguish a Hunnic bowstring's twang from a Gothic one, and knew instinctively which direction an attack would come from based on the wind and terrain. His father, a minor military officer whose name history has forgotten, recognized in his son not just the makings of a soldier, but of a strategist. While other boys played at sword fighting in the streets, Belisarius would perch atop the town's highest tower, studying how raiders used the landscape to their advantage. He absorbed lessons from every skirmish, not just how men fought, but why they won or lost. When Bulgarian raiders struck in 513, it was the 13-year-old Belisarius who noticed their horses were too fresh for a long raid. He warned the garrison commander that this meant a larger force must be waiting in the nearby forests. His insight saved the town. The Byzantine army that arrived to reinforce Germania that year was nothing like the proud legions of old. Gone were the heavy infantry formations that had conquered the known world. In their place rode swift cavalry armed with bow and lance, an adaptation to the lightning warfare of their eastern enemies. To young Belisarius, this was a revelation. Here was Rome not as it had been, but as it needed to be: flexible, adaptive, learning from its adversaries. When the unit's commander offered positions to local recruits, Belisarius stepped forward. He was barely 14, but carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had already learned war's hardest lessons. That same year, he met Antonina, daughter of a charioteer, who would later become his wife and most trusted confidant. She was unlike any girl he had known: sharp-witted, fearless, and as skilled in the arts of deception as any spy. While society raised eyebrows at her unconventional background, Belisarius saw in her the same qualities he had learned to value on the frontier: adaptability, cunning, and the ability to survive against the odds. Their courtship was brief but intense, conducted against the backdrop of an empire struggling to reinvent itself. As Belisarius rose through the ranks, those who served with him noted something unusual. While other officers shouted orders and demanded respect, he led with a quiet intensity that inspired fierce loyalty. He ate with his men, learned their names, and most importantly, listened to their observations. A Thracian cavalryman might have insight into horse behavior that no manual taught. A Syrian archer might know tricks for predicting the wind. Belisarius absorbed it all, building a foundation of practical knowledge that would soon revolutionize Byzantine warfare. The boy from the frontier was becoming the man who would save an empire, though not in the way anyone, least of all himself, expected. The making of a master, Belisarius, and the birth of modern warfare. Constantinople in 521 AD was a city of golden domes and deadly whispers. As Emperor Justin, I struggled to hold together Anastasius's fragile legacy. The army was transforming itself on the parade grounds outside the Theodosian walls. Here, among the dust and sweat of daily drills, Belisarius found his true calling. While others saw cavalry practice as mere tradition, he turned it into an art form. His unit moved like water, flowing around obstacles, striking with impossible precision, then vanishing before the enemy could respond. The old guard sneered at his innovations. Warfare is won by infantry, they insisted, clutching their copies of ancient military manuals. But Belisarius had seen the future on the frontier, and had rode on horseback. He drilled his men to shoot arrows at full gallop, a technique borrowed from the Huns. He taught them to fight with lance and bow together, combining Persian precision with Gothic power. Most crucially, he trained them to think independently, to seize opportunities without waiting for orders. His superiors watched with growing interest as his experimental unit consistently outmaneuvered larger forces in war games. When word reached Constantinople that Persian forces had breached the eastern frontier in 524, Justin needed a commander who understood this new style of warfare. Belisarius, not yet 25, received his first major command. The expedition was meant to be a simple show of force, remind the Persians of Byzantine power, then return home. Instead, it became the crucible that would forge both his reputation and his legend. The Battle of Minduo should have been a disaster. Outnumbered and cut off from reinforcement, Belisarius's force faced an elite Persian unit backed by war elephants. Traditional tactics would have meant certain defeat. Instead, he unveiled a strategy so audacious that chroniclers initially refused to believe the reports. He positioned his archers on the high ground, but not to rain arrows on the enemy. Instead, they fired at the ground in front of the charging elephants, the arrows sticking up like a forest of spears. The massive beasts, their sensitive feet unable to navigate the hazard, panicked and turned on their own lines. In the chaos that followed, Belisarius's cavalry struck from 3 directions at once, a maneuver that required split-second timing. Victory came at a terrible price. During the final phase of the battle, a Persian cavalry officer's blade found its mark. Belisarius lost his left arm at the shoulder, and with it, what many assumed would be his military career. While he recovered in a field hospital, delirious with fever, the story of his innovative tactics spread through the army. By the time he regained consciousness, he was already becoming a legend. Lesser men might have accepted a comfortable retirement. Instead, Belisarius turned his injury into an advantage. Unable to demonstrate techniques himself, he developed an extraordinary ability to explain complex maneuvers in simple terms. His missing arm became a symbol of his dedication, earning him deeper respect from his men than any medal could have achieved. He learned to write and draw battle plans with his right hand, his diagrams becoming famously precise and clear. When Justinian, Justin's nephew and heir, visited the eastern frontier in 525, he found not a broken man, but a commander whose presence alone could steady nervous troops and intimidate enemy scouts. Here was someone who had literally given part of himself to the empire, yet asked only to continue serving. In Belisarius, Justinian recognized a general who could match his own ambitions for restoring Roman glory. The emperor-to-be made a mental note. This one-armed commander from the frontier might be exactly what the empire needed. As if to prove Justinian's instincts right, Belisarius spent his convalescence studying. He devoured military treatises from the Library of Constantinople, comparing ancient tactics to modern challenges. His quarters became a hub of innovation, where veterans and scholars alike gathered to discuss the evolution of warfare. He developed a systematic approach to military intelligence, creating networks of scouts and informants that would later prove invaluable. Most importantly, he learned to turn his injury into psychological warfare. Enemy commanders, expecting weakness, would find themselves outmaneuvered by a general who had learned to see the entire battlefield as a single, interconnected system. By the time Justinian ascended to the throne in 527, Belisarius had transformed himself into something unprecedented, a new kind of Roman general for a new kind of empire. His greatest tests still lay ahead, but the foundation was laid. The one-armed master of modern warfare was ready to reshape history. The Persian Gambit, a turning point in military history. Dawn broke over the fortress of Dara in June 530 AD, revealing a sight that made even veteran soldiers pause. 40,000 Persian troops stretching to the horizon, their armor gleaming in the morning sun. The Sassanid Emperor Kavad had sent his best, the Immortals, elite Persian cavalry who had never known defeat, backed by war elephants and mercenary auxiliaries. Against this juggernaut, Belisarius commanded barely 25,000 men. As he rode along his lines that morning, his empty left sleeve pinned to his cuirass, soldiers watched him for any sign of concern. They found none. What the Persians saw that morning appeared to be standard Byzantine deployment: infantry in the center, cavalry on the wings. What they couldn't see was the web of trenches Belisarius had ordered dug during the night, carefully concealed and positioned at precisely the distance where Persian cavalry typically began their charge. Behind the Byzantine lines, local guides waited with detailed knowledge of every fold in the terrain. In his command post, Belisarius had assembled an unprecedented team of interpreters, not just for Persian, but for every language spoken by their auxiliaries. Every scrap of intelligence could make the difference between victory and annihilation. The Persian commander, Perozes, opened with a psychological ploy. He sent a message to Belisarius: "I will dine in your command tent tonight. Have a bath prepared." Belisarius' response became instant legend among his men. He sent back a single line: "I've changed the menu." Those who served closest to him recognized the cold intensity in his voice, the same tone he used when setting an intricate trap. What followed was a masterpiece of tactical deception. The Byzantine lines appeared to waver under the initial Persian assault, drawing their cavalry deeper into the prepared killing ground. Hunnic mercenaries, loyal to Belisarius from his frontier days, emerged from hidden positions to tear into the Persian flanks. The trenches split the Persian cavalry charge into manageable segments, which Belisarius' mobile reserves attacked one by one. When the Immortals themselves committed to the battle, they found not the easy breakthrough they expected, but a complex web of overlapping fields of fire from composite boughs. The decisive moment came at noon. The Persian center, frustrated by their inability to break through, began an all-out charge. This was exactly what Belisarius had planned for. He unleashed his final surprise. a unit of Arab cavalry that had circled wide during the night, now striking the Persian rear at precisely the right moment. The Immortals found themselves caught in history's first documented tactical pincer movement, their legendary discipline shattering under attacks from 3 directions. As Persian forces retreated in disorder, leaving 8,000 dead on the field, Belisarius prohibited pursuit. His restraint puzzled some officers until they saw Persian wounded being treated alongside their own men. This was another innovation, using mercy as a strategic weapon. Word spread through the region. Here was a Roman general who fought with honor, yet showed compassion in victory. Within months, Persian deserters began providing him with intelligence about their army's movements. The victory at Dara shifted the balance of power in the eternal war between Rome and Persia, but it also marked a turning point in military history. Belisarius had demonstrated that superior numbers could be defeated through a combination of preparation, deception, and precise timing. His battle reports, written one-handed in precise detail, became required reading at the Byzantine Military Academy. Yet in Constantinople, his growing fame attracted dangerous attention. Court intrigues flourished like poisonous flowers. Justinian's advisors began whispering about the dangers of a too successful general. Rumors circulated about Belisarius's wife Antonina's friendship with the Empress Theodora. Was it genuine or part of some deeper political game? Even as the empire celebrated his victory, forces were gathering that would test Belisarius's loyalty far more severely than any Persian army. The eternal war ground on, with raids and counter-raids, keeping the eastern frontier in constant turmoil. But something fundamental had changed. The Persians now thought twice before challenging Byzantine forces directly. They had learned, at terrible cost, that facing the one-armed general meant facing an opponent who could turn their own strength against them. In their councils of war, they began referring to him with a new title, the Roman who sees tomorrow. They didn't realize that Belisarius's greatest victories and greatest trials still lay ahead in theaters of war far from the Persian frontier. The conquest of Africa, Belisarius's triumph and challenges. The harbor of Constantinople erupted in chaos on June 21st, 533 AD. 500 ships lay at anchor, loaded with supplies, horses, and 16,000 nervous soldiers. Justinian had just announced what seemed like madness. Belisarius would sail to Africa and overthrow the Vandal kingdom with a force smaller than what most generals would consider a reconnaissance party. The emperor's advisors were already taking bets on how quickly the expedition would be annihilated. What no one else knew was that this invasion force carried 2 secret weapons. The first was a revolutionary new ship design Belisarius had developed with master shipwrights, dromons modified with hinged ramps that could be lowered onto beaches, allowing cavalry to charge directly from ship to shore. The second was a network of contacts Antonina had cultivated among North African merchants, providing detailed intelligence about Vandal defenses and local grievances that could be exploited. The crossing nearly ended in disaster. A stop for water at Sicily stretched into weeks as disease swept through the fleet. Men whispered that the expedition was cursed. Belisarius turned the delay into an advantage, drilling his forces in amphibious operations while his agents spread rumors in Africa about the size of his army. By the time they finally sailed, Vandal spies were reporting phantom Byzantine armies massing at every port in the Mediterranean. They landed at Kaput Vada, modern-day Tunisia, in a maneuver that would be studied for centuries. Instead of seeking a harbor, Belisarius chose an open beach. His new ship designs allowed his entire force to disembark in hours rather than days. The Vandals, expecting the traditional lengthy process of unloading at a port, found themselves facing an army that seemed to materialize from the sea itself. The march to Carthage became a masterclass in psychological warfare. Belisarius enforced iron discipline. Any soldier caught looting or harassing civilians faced immediate execution. Local farmers, expecting barbarian invaders, found instead an army that paid for supplies in gold. Word spread rapidly through the countryside. The Romans had returned, not as conquerors, but as liberators. Village after village welcomed them with grain, water, and most crucially, intelligence about Vandal movements. King Gelimer of the Vandals had a reputation for brilliance, but he faced an opponent who seemed to read his mind. At the Battle of Ad Decimum, Gelimer devised a complex three-pronged attack to crush the Byzantine force. His plan was tactically sound, but Belisarius had anticipated it down to the hour. The one-armed general positioned his forces to turn each Vandal thrust into a disaster, using the terrain to split enemy forces and destroy them piecemeal. The gates of Carthage opened without a siege on September 15th, 533 AD. Belisarius entered the city that evening, walking rather than riding, his empty sleeve a stark reminder of the price of victory. He headed directly to the Basilica of St. Cyprian, where he prevented his soldiers from looting by a simple expedient. He knelt in prayer, making it clear that anyone who disturbed the peace would answer personally to him. The Vandal kingdom didn't collapse immediately. Gelimer rallied his forces for one final battle at Tricamarum in December. The fighting was brutal, with Vandal heavy cavalry nearly breaking the Byzantine lines. The decisive moment came when Belisarius himself led a charge that scattered the Vandal center. Witnesses described him guiding his horse with his knees while wielding his sword, a sight so inspiring that his men fought like demons to protect their one-armed commander. In the aftermath, Belisarius faced a unique challenge, integrating a conquered people into the empire. His solution was characteristically innovative. He offered Vandal nobles a choice: swear loyalty to Rome and keep their lands, or accept generous terms to resettle in Asia Minor. Many chose to stay, impressed by the general's reputation for keeping his word. Those who resettled in the east would later provide excellent heavy cavalry for Byzantine armies. The conquest of Africa had taken less than 4 months. Belisarius had destroyed a kingdom that had defied Rome for a century, using a force that would have been considered inadequate for a minor border skirmish. The victory stunned the medieval world. In Constantinople, the mood shifted from skepticism to wild celebration. Justinian ordered a triumph, the first Rome had seen in centuries. Yet in the midst of glory, danger lurked. Belisarius' success exceeded even Justinian's expectations, triggering the emperor's paranoid fears. As Africa's liberator sailed home, courtiers were already whispering new poison into royal ears. Who else, they asked, could take a tiny army and conquer a kingdom? What might such a man do with the full resources of the empire at his command? The question would hang over the next phase of Belisarius' career like a sword of Damocles, as Justinian turned his eyes toward an even greater prize: Italy, the heart of the old empire, now under Gothic rule. Reconquest of Italy. 7,000 Gothic warriors stood before its walls, led by their newly elected king Vitiges. Inside the Eternal City, Belisarius commanded a force of just 5,000 men, barely enough to man the massive Aurelian walls. As winter clouds gathered over the 7 hills, the one-armed general climbed to the highest point of the mausoleum of Hadrian to survey his impossible position. The coming siege would either cement his legend or end it. The campaign had begun 9 months earlier with characteristic audacity. Landing in Sicily, Belisarius unleashed a new weapon: propaganda. His agents spread word that the Byzantine army came to liberate Italy from barbarian rule, restoring the true Roman heritage. The strategy proved devastatingly effective. Syracuse, Palermo, and Naples fell in rapid succession, though the capture of Naples revealed a darker side to the war. When the city refused surrender terms, Belisarius's engineers discovered a way in through the aqueducts. The resulting sack of the city haunted him. Afterward, he doubled down on his policy of generous terms for peaceful surrender. Rome's Gothic garrison fled at his approach, but Belisarius knew the real battle was just beginning. He immediately set about preparing the city for siege, implementing innovations that would influence urban warfare for centuries. Every grain of wheat in Rome was catalogued and stored. The Tiber's banks were fortified with ingenious water-powered mills that could grind grain even under arrow fire. Most crucially, he turned Rome's ancient monuments into a defensive network. The Mausoleum of Hadrian became a fortress, its ancient statues repurposed as ammunition for siege engines. Vitiges attacked with everything: siege towers, battering rams, and waves of Gothic warriors. Belisarius countered with mechanical ingenuity and psychological warfare. He invented a new type of defensive ballista that could traverse horizontally, sweeping the walls clear of attackers. When food ran low, he had his men throw loaves of bread at the Gothic lines to demoralize them. His most brilliant innovation came in response to Gothic siege towers. He calculated their exact range and had his men build ramparts precisely 1 foot too high for them to reach. The siege dragged into spring, then summer. Belisarius seemed to be everywhere at once, directing repairs, leading sorties, even manning the walls himself when illness depleted his garrison. He slept only 2 hours a night, yet his mind remained razor-sharp. When Gothic engineers attempted to divert the Tiber, he turned their own work against them, using the altered flow to power additional mills and flood their camps. By March 537, Rome had become a crucible of innovation. Belisarius developed new theories of urban warfare daily, testing them against Gothic assaults. He proved that a small, mobile force could defend a massive circuit of walls by concentrating at critical points. His use of the Tiber as both defensive barrier and transport artery revolutionized river warfare. Most importantly, he demonstrated that civilian morale was as crucial as military strength. His daily rides through Rome's streets, conspicuous in his gleaming armor and empty sleeve, became a symbol of defiance that inspired the population to endure unimaginable hardship. The siege's turning point came through intelligence rather than force. Belisarius's network of spies reported that the Goths were running low on supplies and suffering from malaria. He seized the moment to launch a series of devastating raids, using small, elite units to destroy Gothic supply lines. The psychological impact was devastating. The besiegers became the besieged. Vitiges finally withdrew in March 538, leaving 40,000 Gothic dead beneath Rome's walls. Belisarius had achieved the impossible, defending Rome with a force barely large enough to man a frontier fortress. The victory should have been his crowning achievement. Instead, it marked the beginning of his greatest trials. Justinian, increasingly paranoid about his general's growing fame, began micromanaging the Italian campaign from Constantinople. New commanders arrived with conflicting orders, undermining Belisarius's strategy of systematic reconquest. The war devolved into a series of inconclusive battles that devastated the Italian countryside. Yet even with his authority compromised, Belisarius continued to innovate. His system of fortified strongpoints and mobile reserves became the template for Byzantine defense in depth. His techniques for urban warfare would be studied by military academies for the next 1,000 years. The Gothic War wouldn't end for another 15 years, long after Belisarius had been recalled to Constantinople. But his defense of Rome remained its defining moment, proof that one brilliant commander could overcome seemingly impossible odds through a combination of technical innovation, psychological warfare, and indomitable will. The price of victory was etched in the ruins of Italy. But Belisarius had demonstrated once again that the art of war was ultimately the art of the possible. Betrayal and Vindication, the story of Belisarius. The throne room in Ravenna gleamed with ancient splendor in 540 AD as Gothic nobles made an unprecedented offer to Belisarius, the crown of the Western Roman Empire. The proposal made strategic sense. Here was a general who had proven himself a better ruler than any Gothic king, a commander who treated conquered peoples with respect and justice. The Western Empire, dead for 64 years, could live again under his leadership. For a long moment, the one-armed general stood silent, weighing destiny in his hand. His refusal shocked everyone except those who knew him best. "I am a Roman," he declared, "and Romans do not betray their emperor." The Goths, incredulous, pressed the offer again. They couldn't comprehend someone refusing absolute power. But Belisarius had seen firsthand how power corrupted. His loyalty to Justinian stemmed not from naivete, but from a deep conviction that a divided empire would fall prey to its enemies. The news reached Constantinople faster than seemed possible. Justinian's reaction proved that no good deed goes unpunished. The emperor, convinced that Belisarius must have orchestrated the offer himself, immediately recalled him from Italy. The campaign that had nearly restored the Western Empire was left in the hands of incompetent commanders who quickly lost most of what Belisarius had won. Court life in Constantinople proved more dangerous than any battlefield. Rivals whispered that Belisarius was building a private army. His wife Antonina's friendship with Empress Theodora became both shield and sword, protecting him from some threats while exposing him to others. When Theodora demanded that Antonina's daughter marry Belisarius's godson against both families' wishes, refusal wasn't an option. The resulting scandal nearly destroyed his marriage and gave his enemies new ammunition. The decisive blow came when Justinian stripped him of his command and confiscated his private fortune in 542 AD. Theodora's intervention saved him from execution, but the message was clear. Loyalty meant nothing to a paranoid emperor. For 2 years, the empire's greatest general lived under virtual house arrest, while Persian armies ravaged the eastern provinces and Italy slipped back into Gothic hands. Yet even in disgrace, Belisarius maintained his dignity. He spent his days writing a military manual, crystallizing decades of experience into principles that would influence warfare for centuries. His innovations in cavalry tactics, siege warfare, and psychological operations were preserved for future generations. More importantly, he refused to become bitter, maintaining that personal honor mattered more than reputation. The bubonic plague that struck Constantinople in 542 AD changed everything. As the city descended into chaos, with thousands dying daily, Belisarius emerged from retirement to organize the response. Using military precision, he created a system of quarantine zones and food distribution that saved countless lives. His empty sleeve became a symbol of hope as he personally visited the sick, demonstrating that even a devastating disease couldn't stop him from serving his people. Justinian, himself recovering from the plague, finally recognized the foolishness of sidelining his best general. The empire faced threats on every frontier: Persians in the east, Goths resurgent in Italy, Slavs probing the Danube. In 544 AD, Belisarius was reinstated and sent back to Italy, but with a fraction of the resources he needed. It was almost as if Justinian wanted him to fail. Instead, Belisarius achieved the impossible yet again. With barely 8,000 men, he recaptured Rome and held it against another Gothic siege. His reputation alone caused several cities to surrender without a fight. Yet every victory seemed to increase Justinian's suspicion. The emperor repeatedly undermined him by withholding reinforcements and sending contradictory orders to his subordinates. The final humiliation came in 548 AD, when Justinian recalled him yet again, replacing him with his own nephew. Belisarius accepted the decision with characteristic stoicism. He knew that empires ultimately rest not on personal glory, but on the willingness of good men to subordinate their ambitions to the greater good. His refusal of the Western crown hadn't been an act of submission, but a profound statement about the nature of loyalty and the price of civilization. By now, age was catching up with the one-armed general. His hair had turned white, though his mind remained sharp as ever. He settled into a life of quiet retirement, writing and advising younger officers who sought his wisdom. Yet fate wasn't finished with him. In 559 AD, at the age of 60, he would be called upon for one final service, a last battle that would prove his most remarkable victory of all. The final battle, Belisarius' last triumph. Constantinople trembled in December 559 AD. Zabergan's Bulgar horde had crossed the frozen Danube, shattering the frontier defenses. Now 60,000 warriors approached the imperial capital, their campfires visible from the city walls. In desperation, Justinian turned to his last resort, a retired, aging general living quietly in his urban villa. The emperor's messenger found Belisarius in his study, surrounded by military texts and maps, his sword hanging unused on the wall. The city Belisarius emerged to defend was a shadow of its former strength. The plague had decimated the population. Most of the regular army was tied down in Italy and Persia. All he had to work with was the city watch and a handful of veterans from his old campaigns, perhaps 300 men in total. The situation seemed hopeless, but those who served with him before noticed the familiar gleam in his eye. The one-armed general had one last masterpiece to compose. Instead of manning the massive Theodosian walls, Belisarius implemented a strategy that seemed like madness. He ordered his tiny force to camp outside the city, in plain view of the Bulgar army. His men thought he had lost his mind until they saw what happened next. Every night he had them light thousands of campfires, far more than their numbers warranted. During the day, the same troops would march out one gate and in another, changing uniforms to appear as different units. Local farmers brought their cattle to add to the dust clouds, creating the illusion of massive troop movements. Zabergan's scouts reported that Constantinople must have at least 40,000 defenders. The Bulgar leader, wary of Belisarius' reputation, hesitated. That hesitation was all the old general needed. He launched a series of lightning raids against Bulgar foraging parties, striking from unexpected directions, then vanishing into the countryside. Each raid was precisely calculated to create the impression of different Byzantine units operating independently. The Bulgars began to see Byzantine forces everywhere, jumping at shadows. The decisive moment came when Zabergan, frustrated by the apparent stalemate, launched a major probe of the city's defenses. Belisarius had prepared for this, positioning his veteran cavalry in a hidden ravine. As the Bulgar vanguard passed, he sprung the trap. The timing was perfect. His small force hit the Bulgars just as a winter storm broke, the wind and sleet adding to the confusion. In the chaos that followed, the Bulgars believed they were being attacked by multiple army corps. The rout was total. Zabergan's army, convinced they were about to be encircled by superior forces, fled back across the Danube. They left behind their siege equipment and supply trains, along with their reputation for invincibility. Belisarius had saved Constantinople with a force smaller than what most generals would consider a reconnaissance party. It should have been a moment of triumph, but fate had other plans. The strain of the campaign had taken its toll on the aging general. A fall from his horse during the final battle left him with internal injuries that never properly healed. More crushing was Justinian's reaction. Instead of gratitude, the emperor expressed only suspicion about how Belisarius had achieved such a victory with so few men. The final years were quiet ones. Belisarius retired again, this time permanently to his estate outside Constantinople. He spent his days writing his memoirs and meeting with young officers eager to learn from his experience. His relationship with Justinian remained complex. The emperor never fully trusted him, yet couldn't help consulting him on military matters. Their last meeting, shortly before Belisarius' death in 565 AD, was a poignant one. Two old men, once young and full of dreams about restoring Roman glory, now faced with the reality of how empires actually end, not with grand battles, but with quiet compromises. The legends began almost immediately after his death. Some claim Justinian had him blinded and reduced to begging in the streets, a dramatic tale that captured the imagination of later generations, but had no basis in historical fact. The truth was both simpler and more profound. Belisarius died as he had lived, with dignity, honor, and an unshakable loyalty to the idea of Rome, even when Rome's emperor proved unworthy of such devotion. His innovations lived on long after his death. The Byzantine military academies studied his campaigns for centuries. His theories about mobile defense and psychological warfare influenced military thinking well into the medieval period. But perhaps his greatest legacy was the example he set, that true greatness lies not in achieving power, but in how one uses it. The one-armed general who refused a crown proved that loyalty, intelligence, and moral courage could achieve what mere force of arms could not. In the end, Belisarius' story is not just about military genius or political intrigue. It's about a man who saw clearly what needed to be done to preserve civilization, and did it regardless of personal cost. His final victory wasn't over the Bulgars, it was over the temptations of power itself. In an age of chaos and betrayal, he remained true to his principles, showing that one person's integrity could sometimes be enough to hold back the darkness, if only for a little while longer. The legacy of Belisarius, the last Roman hero. 3 months after Belisarius' death, Justinian followed him to the grave. The empire they had fought to restore would survive another 9 centuries, but never again would it come so close to reclaiming its ancient glory. The age of reconquest died with the one-armed general who had made it possible. Yet his influence echoed through history in ways neither he nor Justinian could have imagined. In the military academies of Constantinople, Belisarius' innovations became doctrine. His system of defense in depth protected the empire's borders for generations. His techniques for siege warfare and urban combat were still being studied when Constantinople finally fell to the Ottomans in 1453. The Byzantine armies that held back waves of Arab conquest in the 7th century used cavalry tactics he had developed. Even their enemies learned from him. Persian military manuals from the 7th century explicitly referenced his strategies. But his most profound legacy wasn't military at all. In an age when might made right, Belisarius demonstrated a different kind of strength. He showed that intelligence could overcome brute force, that mercy could be more effective than cruelty, and that loyalty to principles mattered more than personal glory. His treatment of conquered peoples set a standard for humanitarian warfare that wouldn't be matched for 1,000 years. While other conquerors left trails of destruction, Belisarius built libraries, restored infrastructure, and integrated former enemies into the imperial system. The contrast between Belisarius and Justinian crystallized 2 competing visions of power that would battle through history. Justinian sought to rule through force and fear, building grand monuments while overtaxing his people. Belisarius led through example and innovation, earning loyalty through competence and character. One tried to restore Rome's glory through gold and marble. The other understood that civilization's true strength lies in the integrity of those who serve it. Time stripped away the legends that grew around him. The tale of his blinding became the subject of paintings and poems, but the historical reality proved more compelling. A brilliant general who chose loyalty over power, innovation over tradition, and principle over glory. He wasn't a perfect man. His handling of the Naples siege showed a capacity for necessary cruelty, and his relationship with Antonina was complicated by court politics and personal betrayals. But in an age of chaos, he provided something rare, an example of how to serve a greater cause without losing one's humanity. Modern military historians rank him among history's greatest commanders, alongside Alexander and Caesar. But unlike them, Belisarius never sought to build an empire of his own. He understood something his rivals missed, that empires ultimately survive not through force of arms, but through the willing service of those who believe in what they represent. His refusal of the Western crown wasn't an act of submission. It was a profound statement about the nature of legitimate authority and the importance of constitutional order. Today, little physical evidence remains of Belisarius's achievements. The fortifications he built were dismantled by time. The armies he trained were disbanded. The empire he served crumbled into dust. But his real monument isn't built of stone. It lives in the principle he embodied, that one person's integrity, intelligence, and courage can turn the tide of history. Not through raw power or brutal force, but through the patient application of skill, wisdom, and unwavering dedication to a cause greater than oneself. In the end, Belisarius' story offers a lesson as relevant now as it was 15 centuries ago. In a world of increasingly powerful technology and increasingly complex conflicts, victory still depends more on the character of leaders than on the strength of their weapons. The one-armed general proved that the greatest battles are won not just with the sword, but with the mind and heart. His life reminds us that true heroism lies not in seeking glory, but in serving faithfully, thinking clearly, and maintaining one's principles, even when it comes at great personal cost. Perhaps that's why his story continues to resonate. In an age desperate for models of ethical leadership and principled service, Belisarius stands as a reminder that such ideals aren't mere fantasy. They've existed before. They can exist again. The last Roman hero shows us that even in the darkest times, one person's dedication to principle can help preserve civilization itself, if only we have the wisdom to learn from his example.